Hi. So today we're going to be talking about the Barbour Boat Works Company, specifically the different types of pleasure craft that the company built from 1950 to 1962. A little bit of brief background on the company is important to consider, and we'll start there. So the Barbour Boat Works Company was founded in 1932 by Herbert William Barbour, who had previously been the superintendent of the Meadows shipyard, and they built different types of recreational watercraft at the Barbour Boat Works Company from 1932 until 1962. In 1962, they made the decision to stop this aspect of the business due primarily to a rising demand for fiberglass vessels and their decision to not go into that form of production. From the early days of the shipyard until 1997, the company also had other facets of the business, including governmental and private contracts and various repair and building work. The company also started the Marine Trading Corporation, which moved raw materials along the coast, and Reggie's Outboard Service, which was named after Barbour's son-in-law, Rembert Reginald Rivenberg, who was also heavily involved in the company. So, looking at the various types of vessels that the company produced during the period of 1950 to 1962, there were 9 primary types of vessels being offered, all of which you can see an example of here, except for the deluxe models. The deluxe models were only produced for 1 year during this study period, 1950, and unfortunately I have not found any visual depictions of that types of vessels. But jumping ahead here, you can see the different types of vessels that were available each year. Now, as you can see, some of the vessel types are counted more than once each year, and this is due to a variety of factors. Early on, the primary differences in the vessel types were length. The Barbour Utility, for example, was produced in both a 12-foot and a 14-foot length each year it was built. Other vessels, particularly the Silver Clipper line, varied much more greatly. So, in 1957, the Silver Clipper line was introduced, and this distinction was due to the design of the hull. By 1960, all but 2 of the vessel types offered were variations on the Silver Clipper hull, and this meant that there were differences both in length but also in top types, such as open top, hard top, and convertibles. Now, those top types were some of the main defining differences between the different Silver Clippers being offered. Some other vessels that were being produced also had different options for top types in similar manners, but because the options were not advertised as different vessels, they are not counted in the same way on this chart. Looking now at some of the ways that the company advertised their vessels, here's one of the earliest brochures that the company produced. It is from sometime before World War II, likely circa 1937, maybe 1938. Personally, I would be slightly surprised if it was from 1938, as that was the year that the Vacationer was introduced, as can be known from the later brochures, which proudly note how many years that vessel had been in production. And there is neither a vessel specifically called the Vacationer, nor are there any other 15-foot vessels within this brochure. There is a utility model, which has been called the sister ship of the Vacationer, but because the utilities were not advertised with their initial production date in the same way that the Vacationer was, I'm sticking to the circa 1937 or pre-World War II as the date of this brochure. Moving on, though, one of the helpful ways in which the company advertised their vessels was through sales brochures. Now, from 1951 through 1961, there were brochures published, all following a very similar style. It should be noted, however, that it is possible that these were produced earlier than that, but 1951 was the first locatable year for this study, with the information on the 1950 line coming from a price sheet from the archives at East Carolina University. But these brochures all followed a similar pattern: an artistic front and back cover showing the boats being enjoyed, a short message to the consumers primarily talking about the company itself. Occasionally, there would be a collage showing more artistic views of the vessels, similarly to the shots found on the covers. And then the majority of the brochures were focused on advertising the vessels themselves. What is exciting about these sales brochures is the fact that the last 2 pages included technical specifications on the vessels, both including measurements and some of the materials that were used. So another way in which the company advertised fairly heavily was through ad placements in special interest magazines, such as Motorboating Magazine, Yachting, and The Rudder, all of which had national audience. Now, the 2 advertisements on the far left and far right of this slide show a fairly typical advertising style for the company. In the January editions of Motorboating magazine, the company would usually include an advertisement which listed all of the vessels being produced in that year, and smaller advertisements were used to focus more specifically on one or two model types. Now, the style of advertisements that you see from the examples on both sides are fairly typical of the style that the advertisements used throughout the company for most years of advertising. It is worth noting that the example in the middle is from 1962, the last year that the company built their recreational watercraft, and it is definitely distinctive. This advertisement is one example of the way in which they really changed the way in which they advertised both their vessels and themselves as a company to hopefully appeal to a wider range of consumers. Here you can see another two examples of the ways in which during the last few years of recreational watercraft production, the company sought to make a change. The 1961 specification page you can see on the left shows an example of the ways in which the company started condensing the types of vessels that they produced with the Silver Clipper line and put a greater emphasis on the ways in which you could choose to customize the same basic hull type. Particularly from those bottom two examples, you can see that there are 3 and 4 different vessels, all labeled under the same specification heading of Silver Clipper. So the advertisement on the right also shows a particularly important and interesting effort by the company to rebrand themselves. Now, as I've previously mentioned, the reason the company decided to stop making recreational watercraft was due to not wanting to go into fiberglass production. This advertisement from 1959 edition of Motorboating magazine shows that for at least a short while, they actually had that intention. They were going to build not only their traditional lapstrake vessels, which is when the sides of the vessels have boards sort of overlapping like this, but also smooth-sided vessels and fiberglass. Now, they did bring back the skipper in 1960, which was a smooth-sided vessel, but so far this advertisement is the only piece of information regarding an intention to build fiberglass vessels that I have been able to find. But just to wrap this all up, it is clear from looking at these later years of the company's recreational watercraft advertisements that there were efforts being made to appeal to their consumers. They did this through changing the types of vessels being made, changing the ways that they advertised these changes, and through putting an emphasis on the Silver Clipper line rather than continuing with a number of more distinct vessel types. Sometime in 1962, they did make that final decision to stop producing the pleasure craft, but the company continued for another 35 years until 1997, so it was certainly not an immediately detrimental decision on their part. So, yeah, there you have a very brief overview of the advertisements and recreational watercraft built by the Barbour Boat Works Company. Let me just show you 2 slides with the sources that I pulled my images from. Here you go, and thank you for watching.